Let's talk about what it's really like living in Dunwoody, Georgia. Dunwoody, Georgia is located just north of the city of Atlanta, very close to Atlanta. In fact, this is a big part of living in Dunwoody and one thing that really affects the vibe of this city. Dunwoody is just east of Sandy Springs, and so it is very similar to Sandy Springs in a lot of ways. And then like Atlanta, it is somewhat of a city urban kind of feel. But one thing about Dunwoody that makes it unique compared to many of the other suburbs of Metro Atlanta is that it has a great mix of the city vibe and the suburban vibe. If you look at some of these suburbs of Atlanta like Marietta or Swanee or Alpharetta, any one of these that we typically talk about on the channel, they are like all suburban. These are areas where you're going to be car dependent, where you're going to be driving maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes to a grocery store. You know, this is kind of like the suburban areas are super spread out. Typical kind of suburb. In Dunwoody, it's very different in that some of Dunwoody has that city feel and is very easily walkable, and there's some public transportation to get in and around the city of Atlanta, and it's a very quick drive to Atlanta. And then some parts of Dunwoody have that suburban feel, and so very often people who are not necessarily wanting to be in the city life of Atlanta, they want a little bit of suburban living, but they don't want to be like way out there. They choose an area like Dunwoody because of that perfect blend of the city life and the suburban life. What's up, y'all? My name is Victor with Atlanta Suburban Living. We put out videos every week about what it's like to live in Atlanta and the suburbs of Atlanta. Naturally, a big question about Dunwoody that very often people ask is like, what is the crime like? Is it a safe part of Metro Atlanta? This map from crimegrade.org really does a great job of showing what the crime is like in this area. If you look at the southwest part of the city where you kind of see some of that red and orange, this is right along the intersection of Highway 400 and 285. And so these are two major interstates, and they are not only, they're not very residential, it's mostly commercial and industrial. There's also some hospital, medical facilities in this area. And so this is not where the majority of the homes are. And I wouldn't agree that it should be red. It probably should be more like yellow, but this website kind of has it like the red area. But I totally agree that the parts west, north, and east of Dunwoody are super safe. Actually, I would say that all of Dunwoody is super safe. I would have no problem even going with my family in this part of the area where it says it's red or orange or whatever. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. I would feel totally safe in those areas as well, but I do agree it kind of makes sense that that's where the majority of the crime from Dunwoody would be. When it comes to public schools, Dunwoody is not really known for having the best public schools. They're okay, but I think there are a lot of families who live in that area who have their kids go to private school. Public school is not really what Dunwoody is known for, so certainly something to keep in mind. There are other suburbs of Metro Atlanta that have much better public schools. And then when it comes to parks and green space, the truth is that all of the suburbs do a great job. Even the city of Atlanta has more parks and green space than other major US cities, and so plenty of parks and green space in and around Dunwoody. In fact, the Chattahoochee River is located near Dunwoody. It doesn't go into Dunwoody, but the Chattahoochee River provides lots of walking and hiking trails, fishing, swimming, boating there in the Chattahoochee River, and so lots of green space, lots of parks in and around Dunwoody. One common question that I get is like, if I live in Dunwoody, where am I going to work, or where in Metro Atlanta can I live that does not have a long commute to work? And so let's talk about that. If you're planning on moving to Dunwoody, or you just have any questions about what it's like to live here, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. I'm a local realtor here in the area. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. But Dunwoody is very centrally located to many employers. Again, because it's just north of Atlanta, it's a very quick commute to the city of Atlanta. This is not like the kind of city where you have an hour drive to the city of Atlanta. And this is kind of the norm for many residents of Metro Atlanta. An hour commute, unfortunately, because of the amount of traffic that we have here, is pretty typical, but the residents of Dunwoody do not have that hour commute. They're kind of like the exception to the rule. You may be looking at more like, depending on what part of Atlanta you're going to go to, maybe 15 to 30 minute commute for work if you're living in Dunwoody. In addition to that, there's also lots of employers in Dunwoody. You don't necessarily need to go to Atlanta for work. Also, just west of Dunwoody is Sandy Springs, where there are lots of employers, lots of hospitals. Northside Hospital and Emory St. Joseph's Hospital are also in Sandy Springs. So lots of medical providers, which also means lots of employers in the medical field. And then north of Dunwoody are cities like Roswell and Alpharetta, where you have a lot of tech industry. So lots of employers. You don't have a long commute when you live in Dunwoody, and there's no question that this is one of the most important parts about living in Dunwoody. This may be actually the most single-handedly the most important part about living in Dunwoody is that you don't have an hour commute to get to work or a long commute to get to anything. People choose Dunwoody because of how centrally located it is to many parts of your daily life. The neighborhoods in Dunwoody are very family-friendly kind of neighborhoods. One thing that you should know though about this city is that it was developed decades ago. So you don't really see a lot of new construction here. Many of the homes in Dunwoody are from like the 50s to 70s. This is like the most common age home. Fortunately, we're seeing lots of homeowners and lots of sellers renovating their homes. And so this is becoming very common in this city. And so you have these older homes that come with the character and the charm, but you have the newer interiors, which has not always been the case in Atlanta. I know years ago, especially like pre-2020, there was a lot of older homes here in Metro Atlanta, and people didn't really renovate homes. Home values were so low here that it was difficult for many homeowners to recoup their investment if they did renovations on their home. Now, because homes are so much more expensive, it's much easier for homeowners to recoup that investment when they do new flooring or new windows or new kitchen or whatever it is, renovations in their home. It's much easier to get that investment back. And so we're seeing a lot of homeowners and a lot of sellers making those renovations on their homes finally. It's also a very family-friendly suburb, Dunwoody. You don't typically see this in some parts of Atlanta, and so to have that kind of city feel, that suburban feel, and still be a family-friendly area, this is also a big part of living in Dunwoody as well. And then a big one that many people ask me about is like the racial diversity. This is something that's very important to many people, including myself, and I would say Dunwoody does a great job of being a racially or culturally diverse area, especially because of how close it is to Atlanta. It has a lot of that influence from Atlanta. So that melting pot of cultures in Atlanta, fortunately, kind of spreads out to some of the nearby cities like Sandy Springs and Dunwoody. There are so many great things going for it here in Dunwoody. It's definitely one of the best suburbs of Atlanta. I can't stress enough how important it is to be so centrally located and have that easy commute to work and to all of the daily life things in Dunwoody. That is probably the most important part about living there. But there are some downsides to living in Dunwoody. One of those downsides is the age of the homes. For some people, it's like, yeah, that's cool. You've renovated the home and it's got that character and the charm, but that's not really what I'm looking for. Like, that's a common thing for many people. Totally understandable. Maybe a 1960s home is not worth it if it's renovated to you. It kind of depends on personal preference, but there are also some other downsides to living in this city. And if you plan on moving to Dunwoody, you want to make sure you have the whole picture. So I've made an entire video outlining the pros and the cons of living in Dunwoody. You can check it out right here. I'll see you in the next one.